I was knee-deep in a purchase order for replacement gaskets when Jessica Palmer leaned over my cubicle wall like she owned the place, which, technically, she did now. "Hey, Austin, I need you to handle whatever's happening with Mackenzie Hydraulics. They're being difficult again." Difficult. That's what she called a 20-year supplier relationship that kept our production lines running. You know how some people think procurement is just ordering stuff from catalogs? Yeah, Jessica was one of those people. I'm Austin Cross, by the way. 48 years old, been doing procurement at Apex Industrial Solutions for 22 years. Started here when fax machines were still a thing, and handshake deals actually meant something. Maybe you've worked with guys like me, the ones who know every supplier's phone number by heart and can get emergency parts delivered on Christmas morning if you really need them. I nodded, scribbled Jessica's request down, and quietly called George Mackenzie up in Toronto. Took me 15 minutes to sort out what her difficulty really was. A delayed shipment because their main transport truck had broken down on Highway 401. One phone call to a backup carrier I knew from my oil field days in Midland, and the hydraulics were back on schedule. Problem solved. Jessica would later tell the board it was her aggressive vendor management strategy that got things moving. That was my life. The guy who actually fixed things while someone else took credit. I'd been doing this dance so long I could waltz in my sleep. See, here's the thing about industrial procurement, and maybe you know this if you've worked in manufacturing. It's not sexy. Nobody makes motivational posters about gasket specifications or hydraulic pressure ratings. But when that equipment breaks down at 2 a.m. on a Sunday, your entire operation stops. Your production manager starts sweating. Your customers start calling, and that's when they remember guys like me exist. Our main product line depended on a specific hydraulic system that only Mackenzie Industries manufactured, not because they had a monopoly, but because they'd perfected the design over 30 years. George Mackenzie Sr. had built his reputation on one simple principle: make it right the first time, and it'll run for 20 years with minimal maintenance. Their systems lasted twice as long as competitors and cost half as much to maintain. You've probably seen companies try to save money on equipment, only to spend twice as much on repairs. George understood that reliability was worth more than saving a few bucks on the front end. I'd learned that lesson the hard way back in my oil field days. Cheap equipment breaks when you need it most, usually in the middle of nowhere, at the worst possible time. That's why when I moved into industrial procurement, I focused on relationships with suppliers who understood what mission critical actually meant. Then came the email that changed everything. George was getting ready to retire. His son, Danny, was taking over operations, and they were consolidating their distributor network. If we wanted to stay on their preferred vendor list, we needed a representative at their annual supplier summit in Toronto. In person, no exceptions. The email was polite but clear. Show up or get cut. You know how it is with long-term suppliers. They don't ask for much, but when they do ask, it's usually important. George had never required face-to-face meetings before. The fact that he was insisting on it now meant something significant was changing. I forwarded the message to Jessica with a simple request: approval for $2,000 travel expenses. The math was straightforward. Flight to Toronto, 2 nights at a decent hotel, rental car, meals. Basic business travel for a meeting that secured 40% of our annual revenue stream. Any reasonable manager would approve it without question. Jessica called me into her office that afternoon. She was sitting behind a desk that looked like it came from a furniture showroom, all glass and chrome edges. Everything about her screamed MBA program. The way she held her pen like a weapon, the way she stared at her laptop while talking to people, the way she said, "circle back" instead of "talk later." Maybe you've dealt with managers like this, the type who think business is all about spreadsheets and buzzwords. "Austin, what's this about a $2,000 vacation to Canada?" Vacation. That word hit me like a slap. I'd been to Toronto for business maybe 15 times over the years. Seen the inside of airport hotels, conference rooms, and factory floors. If that was someone's idea of a vacation, they needed better travel agents. "It's the Mackenzie Supplier Summit," I said, keeping my voice level. "Annual meeting. George specifically requested we send someone senior." She waved her hand like she was shooing away a fly. "We're not paying for sightseeing trips. Besides, everything's digital now. Can't you just do a video call? You know what's funny about people who think everything can be done digitally? They've never had to explain to a 70-year-old Canadian factory owner why their handshake agreements should be replaced with Zoom meetings. George Mackenzie was old school. He did business face-to-face. His handshake was worth more than most contracts I'd seen. This wasn't about PowerPoint presentations. It was about maintaining relationships that had taken decades to build. I tried explaining this to Jessica, the importance of personal relationships, the value of showing respect to long-term partners, the difference between ordering office supplies and managing critical equipment suppliers. She wasn't listening. She was already typing something on her laptop, probably an email about optimizing travel expenditures or leveraging technology solutions. The same buzzwords that looked good in quarterly reports but meant nothing when your production line shut down because you couldn't get replacement parts. Sorry, Austin, budget's tight. Find another way to handle it. I walked out of her office feeling like I'd just watched someone throw away 20 years of work, but something else was brewing underneath the disappointment. Call it stubbornness, call it pride, call it whatever you want. You know that feeling when someone dismisses something you know is important? When they make you feel like you're overreacting, even though your gut tells you they're dead wrong? That's where I was sitting. I wasn't going to let a relationship that predated Jessica's college graduation die because she couldn't see past a spreadsheet. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and my credit card statements. My wife was watching some cooking show in the living room, and I could hear the TV chef explaining why good ingredients cost more but deliver better results. Seemed appropriate. Flight to Toronto, 300 $. Hotel for 2 nights, $280. Rental car and gas, maybe $200. Food and incidentals, another $150. Total damage, about $970. Less than half what I'd asked the company to cover, but I could swing it without touching our emergency fund. You know how sometimes you make a decision that feels both terrifying and inevitable at the same time? This was one of those moments. I'd spent 22 years being the company man, following procedures, asking permission. But George Mackenzie wasn't asking for permission. He was giving me an opportunity. The question was whether I had the guts to take it. I booked the trip on my personal card, took 2 days of vacation time I'd been saving for a fishing trip to Galveston. Told my wife I was attending a conference that might lead to some consulting opportunities down the road, which wasn't exactly a lie. I just wasn't sure what those opportunities would look like yet. Before I left, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old business card holder and counted what was left. Maybe 20 cards with my Apex title on them, looking tired and outdated. Then I went online to one of those quick print services and ordered a fresh batch. Same name, same phone number, but now the title read Independent Procurement Consultant and the company line was blank. Sometimes you have to dress for the job you want, right? The flight to Toronto was one of those regional jets where tall guys like me spend 2 hours with their knees jammed against the seat in front, surrounded by business travelers who looked as thrilled as I felt about Monday morning flights. But once I checked into the hotel and saw the familiar Toronto skyline, something shifted. This wasn't Apex's trip anymore. This was mine. Maybe you've had that moment when you realize you're not just representing your company, you're representing yourself. It's liberating and terrifying at the same time. The supplier summit was held in a conference center that looked like every other conference center: beige walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, and coffee that could strip paint off a pickup truck. But George Mackenzie was there, and that's what mattered. You could spot him from across the room. Still had that bearing that came from 40 years of building something from nothing. I hadn't seen him in person for maybe 3 years. He looked older, grayer around the edges, but his grip was still firm when we shook hands. You know how some handshakes tell you everything you need to know about a person? George's still said solid, reliable, trustworthy. Austin, didn't expect to see you here. Thought Apex might skip this year like they did last year's quality review meeting. That stung. I hadn't known they'd skip meetings. Jessica had never mentioned it, probably didn't even know it happened. How do you manage vendor relationships when you don't even know what meetings you're missing? Wouldn't miss it, I said. Some relationships are worth the investment. George smiled at that, the kind of smile that said he understood exactly what I meant. We spent the morning session catching up, talking shop, reminiscing about that time in 2015 when Hurricane Harvey knocked out power to his plant, and I helped coordinate emergency generators from 3 different states to keep his production running. Took 48 hours of phone calls and calling in favors. But we kept his lines operational while half of Texas was underwater. George never forgot favors like that. That's the thing about old-school businessmen. They remember who showed up when times got tough. During lunch, he introduced me to his son, Danny. Kid was sharp, engineering degree from University of Toronto, 5 years learning the business from the ground up. But what impressed me was how he listened when George talked about the old days. Too many young executives think experience is just old guys telling war stories. Danny understood it was education. Dad's told me about the hurricane thing, Danny said. How you got those generators shipped overnight on a weekend when everyone else said it was impossible. Said it saved us about $200,000 in downtime costs. I shrugged. Just knew who to call. When you've been around long enough, you build a network of people who can make things happen. That's exactly what we need more of, George jumped in. People who know who to call. These days, everyone wants to do everything through procurement portals and automated systems. Fill out forms, submit requests, wait for approvals. But when things go wrong, you need relationships. You need people who answer their phones at midnight because they know you wouldn't call unless it was important. You've probably seen this shift if you've been in business long enough. Everything's becoming automated, digitized, optimized. But you can't automate trust. You can't digitize 20 years of proving you're reliable. And you sure as hell can't optimize your way out of an emergency when the regular supply chain breaks down. After lunch, George pulled me aside. We walked out to the hotel's courtyard, where the Toronto skyline stretched out beyond a small garden area. The air smelled like traffic and possibility, if possibility has a smell. Austin, I'm going to be straight with you. We're changing how we do business in the States. My stomach dropped. Here it was, the conversation I'd been dreading. You know that moment when you think you're going to a friendly meeting and it turns into a pink slip conversation? That's what this felt like. Danny's convinced me we need fewer distributors, not more. Instead of selling through 12 different companies, we want to work with maybe 3 or 4 exclusive partners. I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. This was how companies politely told you that 20 years of partnership was ending. I had seen it happen to other suppliers, the gradual consolidation, the efficiency improvements, the regretful phone calls explaining why your services were no longer needed. The thing is, George continued, looking out at the city, we want those partners to be people we trust, people who understand our business, people who have been there when we needed them. He paused and I could hear traffic humming in the distance. Construction workers shouting instructions somewhere nearby. Normal sounds of a normal day, while my career was possibly about to take a hard right turn. How would you feel about representing us directly? Not Apex, you personally. Exclusive distribution rights for hydraulic systems in Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. The world tilted sideways. You know that feeling when someone offers you something you didn't even know you wanted? Cars kept moving on the street below. People kept walking past the courtyard. But something fundamental had just shifted, and I was the only one who felt it. I'm not a distributor, I said slowly. I don't have warehouse space or a sales team or any of the infrastructure you'd expect. You've got something better, George said. You've got credibility. Every contractor in the oil patch knows your name. Half the plant managers in Texas have your cell phone number. You think they care about fancy offices and corporate headquarters when their equipment breaks down? He pulled out a manila folder and handed it to me. Inside was a draft agreement, nothing binding, just a framework. But the numbers were real, exclusive distribution rights, 25% markup on wholesale prices. Estimated annual revenue based on historical sales data in my territory. I stared at figures that represented more money than I'd made in salary over the past 3 years combined. Maybe you've had someone offer to bet on you when you weren't even sure you wanted to bet on yourself. It's overwhelming and exciting and terrifying all at once. I need to think about it, I said, which was the understatement of the decade. This wasn't just about leaving Apex. This was about risking everything on relationships I'd spent 2 decades building. What if I was wrong? What if customers wouldn't work with me directly? What if I couldn't handle the business side of things? George nodded like he expected that. Response: take your time. But Danny and I are flying to Houston next month to visit some potential partners. If you're interested, we'd like you to set up those meetings. As our representative, not Apex's. That night, I sat in my hotel room staring at the Toronto skyline and thinking about the last 22 years. All those late-night phone calls when equipment failed. All those emergency shipments I'd coordinated. All those relationships I'd built one conversation at a time. Was I ready to bet my future on them? I called my wife around 10 p.m., told her about the offer, told her about the opportunity and the risk. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the reasons I married her 25 years ago. You know how some people try to solve your problems before you've finished explaining them? She's not one of those people. Sounds like George is offering you a chance to bet on yourself, she said finally. Yeah, but what if I'm wrong? What if this fails? What if I can't make it work? Then you'll be 48 years old with 22 years of experience in procurement. Worst case, you find another job. Best case, you become your own boss doing what you're already good at. She was right, of course. The risk wasn't as big as it felt in my head. The relationships were real. The market was there. And honestly, working for Jessica was slowly killing whatever passion I had left for the business. Maybe it was time to find out what I could accomplish when I wasn't spending half my energy navigating corporate politics. I called George the next morning and told him yes. The flight home felt different. Same cramped seat. Same overpriced airport coffee. But I wasn't the same person who'd flown up 2 days earlier. That guy was Apex's senior procurement specialist. This guy was about to become something else entirely. I didn't go straight to the office when I landed. Instead, I drove home and spent an hour on the Secretary of State's website filing paperwork for Crosspoint Procurement LLC. Took maybe 45 minutes and cost less than $200. By dinner time, I was officially a business owner. You know how anticlimactic major life changes can be? I expected trumpets or fireworks, but it was just me and a computer screen and a confirmation number. The next morning, I walked into Apex like nothing had changed. Same badge swipe, same coffee-stained desk, same view of the parking lot where I'd been parking for over 2 decades. But everything felt temporary now, like I was watching someone else's life through a window. Jessica was already ramping up for the quarterly board meeting. She'd commissioned a new presentation about strategic vendor optimization that included charts showing cost savings from streamlined supplier relationships. One of the slides specifically mentioned the money saved by eliminating unnecessary travel expenses. I almost laughed when I saw that slide. She was taking credit for saving $2,000 while having no idea she'd just lost exclusive access to suppliers worth millions in annual revenue. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss, at least for a little while. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Same conference room where I'd sat through dozens of presentations about efficiency improvements and cost reduction initiatives. This time felt different because I knew it would be my last. Jessica opened with her usual performance about quarterly metrics and operational excellence. She clicked through slides showing improved vendor response times and reduced procurement costs. Everything looked great on paper, which was the only place Jessica's strategies actually worked. You know how some presentations make you feel like you're watching someone congratulate themselves for breathing? This was one of those. Then she got to the slide about McKenzie Hydraulics. Solid partnership, she announced to the room full of executives. Locked in pricing, guaranteed delivery schedules. This relationship represents the kind of long-term stability we're building across our entire vendor network. That's when my phone buzzed. Text message from George McKenzie. Documents ready for signature. Can you pick them up tomorrow? I looked around the conference room. Nobody had any idea what was coming. They were all nodding along with Jessica's presentation, impressed by charts that would be worthless in about 24 hours. You ever been in a room where you're the only one who knows the building's about to come down? It's a strange feeling. The meeting ended with the usual congratulations and back-patting. Jessica had delivered another flawless quarterly report. Everyone felt good about the direction the company was heading. I sat there thinking about how different this room would feel tomorrow. I walked back to my desk and typed out my resignation letter. 2 paragraphs, professional, but not warm. Effective immediately, standard 2-week notice waived due to personal circumstances. I printed it out and put it in an envelope with my badge and company credit card. 22 years reduced to a manila envelope and a box of personal items. Wednesday morning, I drove to the FedEx office instead of Apex. George had overnight shipped the distribution agreement, 12 pages of legal language that basically said, CrossPoint Procurement was now the exclusive distributor for Mackenzie Hydraulics in Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. I signed it at the FedEx counter, right there between someone shipping Christmas presents and a woman mailing insurance documents. No ceremony, no witnesses, just my signature on a contract that changed everything. Sometimes the biggest moments in your life happen in the most ordinary places. Then I drove to Apex and walked straight to Jessica's office. She was on a conference call about vendor performance metrics, speaking in the kind of corporate jargon that sounds important but means nothing. You know the type, lots of synergistic optimization and strategic alignment initiatives. I knocked on her doorframe and held up the envelope with my resignation. She looked confused, then annoyed, like I was interrupting something important. "Can this wait?" she mouthed. I shook my head and walked in. Set the envelope on her desk, right next to her laptop, where she couldn't ignore it. "I'm resigning," I said quietly, effective immediately. Jessica put her call on mute. "What? Why? Is this about the travel thing? Because we can revisit that budget if you've got a solid business case." "Too late for that," I said. Mackenzie Hydraulics just signed an exclusive distribution agreement with my new company. All future orders go through CrossPoint Procurement. The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. "That's not possible. We have a contract with them." "Had," I corrected. "Past tense. Check your email in about an hour. George is sending formal notification of contract termination." Jessica stood up so fast her chair rolled backward into the wall. "You can't do this. This is sabotage. It's unethical." "It's business," I said. "Same business you didn't think was worth $2,000 in travel expenses." I pulled out a folder and placed it next to my resignation letter. Inside was a price list for Mackenzie Hydraulic Systems, effective immediately. Same products they'd been buying for years, but now the prices were different. $8,400 per unit instead of $2,800. Payment terms changed from net 30 to cash on delivery. No volume discounts, no grandfather clauses. Jessica stared at the numbers like they might rearrange themselves into something more reasonable. Maybe you've seen someone's worldview collapse in real time. "It's not pretty." "This is insane," she said. "We can't pay these prices. It'll kill our margins." "Then find another supplier," I suggested. "I'm sure there are plenty of companies that make hydraulic systems just as good as Mackenzie's." We both knew that wasn't true. Mackenzie had spent 30 years perfecting their design. Their closest competitor charged 40% more and had half the reliability. Jessica could shop around all she wanted, but she'd end up paying my prices or dealing with equipment failures that would cost even more. "How long?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long what? How long do we have before our current inventory runs out?" I'd already done the math, naturally. Based on average usage, maybe 6 weeks. 8 if you ration carefully and delay some maintenance schedules. Jessica sank back into her chair. 6 weeks to find alternative suppliers, negotiate new contracts, and retool their entire production schedule around different equipment specifications. Or 6 weeks to swallow her pride and place orders through CrossPoint Procurement. "You planned this," she said, accusation heavy in her voice. "I reacted to it," I corrected. "You made the decision when you called a 20-year supplier relationship unnecessary travel expenses." I turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Sometimes you can't resist the perfect exit line. "Oh, and Jessica, when you place your first order with CrossPoint, there's a $500 processing fee for new accounts, industry standard for smaller clients." Smaller clients. That part felt particularly good to say. 6 weeks later, Jessica called. I let it go to voicemail the first 3 times, but eventually curiosity got the better of me. Her voice sounded strained, defeated. "Austin, we need those hydraulic systems. Our production manager says we're down to maybe 10 days of inventory." I called her back an hour later. Professional, courteous, but not warm. The order came through 2 days later. 12 hydraulic systems at $8,400 each, plus setup fees and expedited shipping charges. Total invoice, $102,300 for equipment that used to cost them $33,600, 3 times what they had paid before. Exactly what the title promised. That was 8 months ago. CrossPoint Procurement now handles orders from 6 companies. My wife handles the books. We're profitable, growing, and I wake up every morning excited about work again. Sometimes the best revenge is just proving you were right all along.